Yeah, it's our time. You do you get any of these? The thing that, it's our use, what are they called?
Amen, Lord.
I don't see it in the church. What if you got to do? And you said, and then I have faith in that. And all that forms are.
I have one of these cleaners. It's so great.
Their topic. Great, actually. Is there one? Hartley, thank you for doing that. You know, the police up there, they not talking, but I don't get off.
I know really go overthink it.
I think.
No,
But.
I always
I
tell people that I start super years.
Yeah.
I stand sort of like the taxi. And unless it's something I just do.
Yeah.
It's been an education.
Yeah, you can have to back and forth.
That's right.
Take call.
That's correct. I've been a senator.
Yeah.
Here in House County. And it's, some of the process is an eye opener. And I also say, really, I would tell you to try it. It's not like you invest time. That's the thing.
Yeah, right.
But really, you learn to see what representative democracy is supposed to be, right? And you can also sort of get a better feel for what really is kind of why it's wise.
Yeah, we have
It's sort of-
3 or 4 people joining us from home.
They're all my friends. The names.
Chaperone for my kids. That was the only time I've ever been in that. Now it's been a lot of work.
So.
It's interesting and important is people who do this.
Yeah.
It's not. Is, I suppose, makes it worth doing. What's gonna, you know, one thing they tell you right away, you know, where get to, or this is what you identify, because you could work very hard and they have, and nothing happened, and I sort of accepted that. What you got out of it was like, and then that's.
You have to realize. There's a development. Right, and then maybe down the road, but it may be like very progressive, but on that age.
There's a restorative justice bill to run restorative justice in every county, and we're trying to get it. Yeah. The thing about this is you represent reality. It's not, and I could argue.
Right.
The other is, they have a national.
Yeah, it's gonna be. Yeah. Or that's not the vice
Yeah.
They
don't have it, no, because. I say it's someone they're in it, and they're like, "Why?" And they didn't have that. Well, you know, it would be worse. I know. We'll see.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, that's. He's, and what can I, we're trying to get, again, we should be very, we can get. That.
So.
I'm trying.
Yeah, it's still low.
That, she's the guy now. He's not signing for this. I didn't know. There you know. Like, oh, that way, okay, but in the summer. Remote. Zoom, you can just- Sign up. Yeah. Then I don't see why they're- oh. But I see that I see that that's flat. And that's more. Yeah, I know. See one this look. See if it's good. You know, see my.
For the thing, I think if you do it, if you, yeah, so now I just picked you up, if you do stand like right there,
Okay,
it
very good.
will.
Okay. I just don't want to see myself.
I can try and do this. Cause now I can see myself like 3 times in there.
It's all fine.
Good morning, everybody. It's about 10:15 and we'll get started this morning. Welcome to Third Sunday Forums. My name is Carrie Ostby. Welcome to everybody at home. If you are at home today, I have you on mute currently. I'll be watching the chat for questions. If you have any, please feel free to put them in chat and I'll try and figure out how to unmute you all at the end if you have questions for the time at the end. But I'd like to welcome Tony and Valerie Mangskau, thank you, to the Third Sunday Forum today, and I will let them introduce themselves.
Okay. So I'm Tony K. Mangskau. I'm a member of the congregation here, and I really appreciate everyone coming. And just as before we start sharing our family story, know that we are available if you're looking for resources, if you've got some puzzling situations that you're trying to figure out. That's where Valerie and I can help. And hopefully by sharing our journey, maybe you'll feel that connection, or you'll know someone that has gone through similar things, and there are ways of providing resources. So we're always available. And before I start talking about just what our family story, I want to mention that this is a story before I met my bestest friend, George, over here. So when I refer to my husband, this is prior to meeting George, who, like I said, he's my bestest friend. So, yeah. So it's estimated that about 1 out of 8 kids live in a home with a parent that struggles with substance abuse. That is a lot of kids. And I was one of those kids. You didn't talk about it. You didn't say anything to anyone. The fear, the uncertainty, sadness, the stress, you felt it was stuffed inside your body and you buried it until it wasn't. My dad went through treatment when I was 7. My parents separated and I lived with my mom and little brothers and grandparents in the state of Nebraska. We moved back to Minnesota and my parents reunited. But I remember visiting my dad in a treatment program. And this was 50 years ago. When treatment programs, it was for old men. And I wondered, what in the world was my dad doing there? So growing up, there was a lot of fighting between my parents. There was silence. You never knew if it was going to be a good day or bad. And the unpredictability created a lot of fear. I was depressed. I felt very alone. alone in a family of 9.
And
During
when-
high
now
I
people come back.
brother,
Now.
we good for some?
There we go. Yep.
Okay, very good. So while I was in high school, I lived with my brother and sister in their home. I lived with an older boyfriend. I lived with my best friend Becky and her parents. I just couldn't stay in the home with my parents. It was too unpredictable. And when I was living with my best friend's family, I really started to notice what a loving relationship between a husband and wife looked like. They were a very important couple that role modeled that this is possible in life to have that loving, true relationship. And after high school, I watched my friends head off to college. I had a partial scholarship to a university, but my dad, he refused to sign the financial aid paperwork, and I couldn't go. So my dream had disappeared. So a message to parents is don't ever rip away a child's dream in life. Never. Eventually, I moved to the big city of Rochester, Minnesota, and met a person that had 4 years of sobriety. He was a respected leader in the recovery community, and he worked at a halfway house for people that were in recovery. He walked the walk and talked the talk. And I thought at least I didn't have to worry about marrying someone that drank. He was sober. We would go on to have 2 kids. We both worked as chemical dependency and mental health counselors. And we both spent some time working in community corrections. We were part of the recovery community. And I'm not sure when things really started to fall apart. Maybe way back when we were first married, I was eager to leave my childhood behind. I had my first child at the age of 20, my second child who's sitting here with us at the age of 22. But here are a few indicators that might have been a sign that things were not okay. I can remember sitting in a car with my kids for hours outside the VFW, waiting for my husband to come out. It would either be with a big win from playing pull tabs, or to give me the reassurance that the checks that my husband had just written for the pull tabs wouldn't be cashed until my payday. Maybe things weren't okay when the sheriff came with eviction papers because my husband had spent the rent money on gambling. And we ended up living in a cheap hotel to keep a roof over our heads. My husband would continue to chase the next big win. I think I started to realize more and more something was wrong when I went to the bank on many occasions. The money had been cleared from my account by my husband, even though his name was not on the bank account. I may have felt something wasn't right as I watched the car that I needed to get my kids to daycare and myself to work. The car was being towed away by a family friend that my husband owed a gambling debt. My marriage didn't involve drinking, but it felt like it. The false promises, the lies, my husband disappearing for days. What I realized was addiction is addiction. Alcohol, drugs, gambling, it was all the same. I tried to create happy times for my kids growing up. You can see there's some photos here that we'll just kind of put on the screen here. But I tried to create happy times for my kids. I made sure that they had what they needed for school, went to their activities like baseball games, football games, cheerleading, soccer, volleyball. I showed up for my kids, which was very different than my childhood. Wasn't I doing better as a parent? I would often ask. I think I realized there were unconsidered problems with my marriage when I confronted my husband about his lying that a large cash amount check hadn't arrived yet, even though our insurance company said it had been cashed. The check was for our rent. I couldn't move our kids again. They loved their school, loved their friends. We had already lived in around a dozen places in Rochester. I wanted stability. My kids needed stability. Prior to confronting my husband, I hadn't seen him for a few days. I'd called the casinos, considered calling the police to report him missing. He came home days later and was tired. He had been in a casino and needed to get some sleep. I asked him about that check. I could see he was getting angry. I ran downstairs to get away. He caught up with me. I was pinned up against a wall with his arm pushing against my neck, and I could not breathe. He was angry, and the words that I remember hearing were, "If you interfere with my gambling, I will kill you." And I believed him. I don't know how I got away, but I was able to get to a phone and call 911. I knew if I stayed in the marriage, I would end up being killed. And my husband eventually was arrested because I knew I had to be there for my kids. Now, my daughter was very attached to her dad, and there's a photo of those two. There were times that she and I didn't get along. I had one full custody of my kids, but my daughter would oftentimes stay with her dad. She blamed me for everything. She was a young teenager and hated her mother. And as time passed, I started to get calls from police. Valerie was out past curfew, had possession of tobacco, being charged with a felony theft, and it went on and on. At one time, she had 13 open court files, and she was a very young teenager. So there was a time that eventually I was hearing from police that Valerie was part of a gang, and that terrified me as a mom. There was a time that the police were there came a time, and many times, when the police were so fed up, tired of responding to any of my calls regarding Valerie, that law enforcement told me they were instructed not to respond to my concerns that she was missing or threatening to harm herself. I was at a loss. By this time, Valerie had been in and out of the juvenile detention center, detox, generals, bomb-weld shelter, various chemical dependency treatment programs. And I was looking to place her in a residential treatment program, but my health insurance denied covering that. And I didn't have $40,000 to pay for it. My only option at the time was to give up custody of Valerie to the state of Minnesota. That was the only way that Olmsted County would pay for her treatment. She was 15. I never got custody of her back. They had complete control of what type of setting she was going to be in. It wasn't that I was a horrible parent, but I just didn't have $40,000. I will say to this day, for as much as we've been through, that giving up custody was the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. I've been a chemical dependency and mental health counselor, and I was the last person that could help her. One thing I'm grateful for growing up, my mom had connected me to the faith community. I'd gone to church with my kindergarten teacher where I'd sit with her in the front pew. Her husband was the minister. This is where I received my first Bible. I went to church with my best friend and her parents. I was 15 when I accepted Jesus as my Savior and gave him what I refer to as a permanent parking spot in my heart. Through all the childhood struggles, marriage problems, and tough times with Valerie, I held onto my faith, and I knew that God was going to see me through. I had to give up control, and I had to trust in God. There were times in Valerie's journey I didn't know if she was alive or dead, and times I was relieved when I'd get a call or see her on the news that she was in jail. I never gave up on her, but had to set some boundaries to maintain my own sanity. An example of a boundary would be, after not seeing or hearing from Valerie for months, I heard a light tapping on my bedroom window at night while I was trying to sleep. And asking who it was, I heard, "Mom, it's me, Valerie. Can I please get something to eat? I'm hungry." Without even opening the blinds, I said no. I didn't see her. I couldn't see her so deep into her addiction. It'd be months before I would hear from her again. She eventually agreed to go to a treatment program. And as I was arranging a ride to Hazelden, she stole all my money and grabbed my checkbook. Eventually, she would be charged with a crime, and after failing court-ordered treatment, she ended up in prison. I mention this because part of our family story involves my taking care of her children through the years. I've taken care of 3 of my grandkids. This left me with the fear of, here we go again. Another generation or not to struggle with addiction.
Well, that was the first time that I've heard that, so, all right. So I grew up here in the great city of Rochester, Minnesota. My 2 parents, Mel and Tony Mangskau. I grew up in a household with both my parents and my older brother, Nick. I had a fairly happy childhood and can recall happy family trips to California and spending time with full sets of grandparents. I also can recall my parents arguing over money and my dad's gambling the family income often. My mom was often working long hours and sometimes 2 jobs to maintain a roof over her head and put food on the table. But as a young child who was a daddy's girl, I saw no wrong with my dad. He was my hero. My dad was very active in the local Alcoholics Anonymous and recovery community. Many people looked up to him with adoration and respect, and his confidence with sharing his recovery story I admired so much. I remember bringing my friends at age 15 to go hear my dad. I was just so proud of him. Most holidays were celebrated at the local pioneer group, and many evenings and weekends I would be at my dad's side as he played cards and encouraged the newcomers. As a young girl growing up, I did always wish for a big family and was envious of my friends with large families. I always felt like an outsider in any group setting I was in, and I had feelings of loneliness and insecurity for as long as I remembered. When my parents got separated when I was 12 years old is when I started my downward spiral with drug addiction and mental health struggles. It started with smoking cigarettes, marijuana, cocaine, mushrooms, and pills by the age of 15. I was helping assist in manufacturing methamphetamine at age 15. It was at age 13 when I started writing as an outlet, as I was in and out of different treatments and institutions. So I'm going to be vulnerable and share a poem I wrote when I was 13, and it's called A Prison of Fear. One last time, thoughts fill my mind. My soul lost, my heart broke, my eyes blind. Trapped in a prison of my fears. I have been locked up so long, I can't remember much of the years. I see all the things that I should not see. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know who is me. Will you free me from my cell with bars of steel which is cold on my skin. I keep falling and falling into this hole. Who will kiss my heart? Who will bless my soul? I reach for the top, but it is nowhere near. I'm trapped in a prison of fear. For the next 10 years, I stayed in that prison of my addiction, fear, and loneliness. I would attempt to fill the void inside with using drugs, dealing drugs, guns, sexual encounters, lying, cheating, stealing. I ended up having my first child justice at age 17, and I lost custody of him when he was 3 years old. This is the biggest thing that still causes me pain today, and one of the reasons that I continue to run from facing the consequences of the choices that I've made. It was 5 years later when I ended up in actual prison, where I soon realized I was pregnant with my second child, Faith. I did not manage to stay sober when I was released from prison. Child protection got involved and I did nothing to turn things around. I ended up losing custody when she was 1 year old. My mom and sister were both helping care for her and was devastated when Faith got adopted to her paternal grandparents who lived in Chicago, Illinois. For a few years after losing custody of Faith, I was homeless, living on the street, in and out of dope houses, and I eventually ended up in Austin. I was living and using drugs with my dad, who had relapsed after 29 years of sobriety, and he was an active heroin addiction. It was at this time in 2015 when I hit my rock bottom. I went with 2 older men one night, and I was drugged, and I was tortured with electricity, and I barely made it out alive. A week after this incident, I was arguing with my boyfriend at the time in the middle of the street for hours, and this is when I cried out to God to rescue me. This was my surrender. I begged God and the Holy Spirit to intervene and end the insanity of the life I was living. Within 24 hours of that cry out to God, my boyfriend Al and I were arrested on burglary charges, and we were being booked into the Moore County Jail. I spent 11 days in booking under supervision due to the fact that the jail staff thought that I was schizophrenic. The PTSD and drug psychosis that I was in was duplicating what they appeared to be schizophrenia because they didn't understand what I had just been through. So after posting bond and getting released from jail, I eventually ended up in treatment and teen challenge the next month, where I was again released to go to a hospital to get my mental health under control. In November of 2015 was the last time I used any drugs or alcohol, and I have been sober ever since. Woo-hoo! Yeah. In March of that year, I was in a domestic violence shelter, and I was trying to maintain a relationship with who I've been dating for a few years in my active addiction. I became pregnant with my third child, Grace Liberty. I was newly sober, suffering from the trauma and PTSD, and I lived in fear. I could not sleep during the day. I was terrified of older white men. I was in and out of psychosis and paranoia, and I could not see any chance of keeping this child that I was pregnant with. It was around 6 months of pregnancy when I was sitting in my probation officer's office, sleeping on the floor at my mom's house, who reluctantly let me back in. When our probation officer encouraged me to start a support group and program for pregnant and parenting moms who struggle with substance use. I had full intention of adopting my daughter out, and I was already working with an adoption agency at that time. It was within this program when another mom encouraged me that I could parent and I could overcome the struggles. This encouragement started to plant seeds within me. I started opening up in group, working with my caseworker to dig myself out of the hole I was in, and I started addressing my mental health. I ended up going to my first out of 15 treatment centers that was mental health focused. This was the one treatment center out of all of them that I graduated successfully. The same mom that encouraged me to consider parenting became one of my best friends, and she still is to this day. After Grace was born and the day before the adoption was to be finalized, I contacted my sister and my mom to see if they would support me in parenting if I stopped the adoption. The next day, my sister and I drove up to the cities to bring Grace home. Child protection was called and immediately intervened, and there was an emergency hearing within 24 hours. The judge went against child protection in their court filing, and I worked the next year, and I was eventually granted custody of Grace when she was 1 year old. It was around this time that I ended up walking through the doors of a local Christ-centered recovery group called Celebrate Recovery. What led me through the doors initially was not due to my meth addiction. I was sober, but not in recovery, or with freedom as I now have today. I will never forget the woman that prayed with me that first night I came. I came for the fear that I was struggling with, and the presence of the Holy Spirit that I felt during that prayer, and the disbelief of how this woman knew what I was struggling with, that kept me coming back each week, and every Friday I've been there ever since. As the weeks went on and the tears were shed, I would continue to open up and share. A lot of my thinking and content was distorted back then, but as time went on, God healed and restored the delusional paranoid thinking that I would fall into from time to time. I got a sponsor, joined a step study, and worked the steps that I built my support system. For a year or more, 6 out of 7 days, I would be in church, Bible studies, recovery meetings, and support groups. I was hungry for the word of God and feel the presence of the Holy Spirit in my life. The missing piece and void that I've been trying to fill my whole life was found when I joined Celebrate Recovery. And that missing piece was Jesus. 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me." Today, I have 7 years of sobriety from addiction, but I have multiple years of walking in freedom, recovery, and restoration over fear, insanity, and institutionalization as well. I'm a small group leader for the Women's Chemical Dependency Group at Celebrate Recovery, and I'm also the assimilation coach. This year, I was successfully discharged from probation after being on probation for nearly 20 continuous years. I voted for the first time this year. I worked for what came out of that same program for pregnant and parenting mothers that I joined 5 years ago as the first parent partner in the state of Minnesota at Family Service Rochester. My job is to use my lived experience with the child protection system and addiction to encourage mothers to work their case plan and help them stay unified or reunify with their children. I am attending school for social work at RCTC. I've been in the Jeremiah program for close to 3 years. I was the president of the participant council there, and I helped facilitate Bible studies and support groups on campus. I'm an advocate for mothers and fathers that struggle with addiction, mental health, poverty, and homelessness. One way I'm able to advocate is on the Human Service Advisory Board of Olmsted County. I've testified on legislation for continued funding at the state capitol that supports programming for mothers. I have facilitated panels and discussions to give people with lived experience like myself the opportunities to create change within the system and to advocate for themselves and their communities. I continue to have restoration within my family, with my friends, and my relationship with my children. What has not been restored, I have faith today that God will restore in His timing, and I have peace with that today. Today, I have not only my blood family, I have my Celebrate Recovery family, my church family, my work family, my Jeremiah family. Hi, Jeremiah moms online. And my recovery family. Everything in my past that was meant to destroy me is now being used for the glory of God. Every past hurt, every past pain and struggle is now being used to connect and build relationships with others. God literally stepped in once I surrendered and took all that was broken and turned it into something beautiful. God restored everything that was lost and gave me back more than I could ever have imagined or ever have asked for. So I will close with this scripture. This is Isaiah 61, 1-3. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captive, and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of the vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord, for the display of His splendor. Thanks for letting me share.
I'm just gonna add one thing, that I am so grateful to this church that does so many beautiful things in our community. But this church was welcoming for George and I. We've been coming here now for a number of years. That loving relationship between my best friend's parents that I saw as a teenager, I have them. And it's because of all of the support that we've received from this church. We knew that that's what we needed to be. And that healthy, loving relationship. So I just want to say thank you to the church. And we would welcome any questions. Maybe this is something that you struggled with within your own family, friends. If you're looking for resources, what Valerie didn't mention is she must like her mother because she's following in the social work footsteps. So she's going to school and will graduate sometime in the future with social work. Yeah, with a social work degree from Winona State. So I'm very, very proud of that. Yeah. Anything we can help with? Any questions, comments?
I think it is so great that you are using your experience and your strength. And thank you so much for sharing all of it. It means a lot to a lot of people. And stuff. And girl, got figured out. But I also want to thank you for sharing your experience as a part of the education background. And I think the area the public is not generally educated about. That substance abuse. Western medicine, no one is anywhere to give them the answer, either pharmaceutical or surgical, to stop that process. Every single person's probably revision is basically left to prove themselves, essentially, their support. And it's not something we ask of people who have allergies, diabetes, cancer. So thank you so much. Yeah.
I always make sure to highlight, like, out of all of those treatment attempts where it's focused on she's using drugs. Nobody ever on, hey, why is she using drugs? What is her, like, what is her? And a lot of times, and I'm just gonna be honest, like families that struggle with addiction, they're not the best ones to support their loved ones. There's too much emotional attachment, and addiction's a family disease. So when somebody struggling with addiction comes out of treatment or comes out of wherever, the family, they didn't get all that treatment support. They didn't get all that healing. They didn't get all that counseling. So as much as they want to believe the patterns of behaviors or the addiction has caused distrust and resentment. So a lot of times families have a hard time moving past that, given the years of the pain that addiction has caused on them as well. So there needs to be support for the whole families and not just the individual struggling. And a lot of times, creating, as an addict, creating a different support system than just your immediate is where, the best support can come from. Yeah, Jody.
I just want to say thank you for sharing your story, both of you. And I'm familiar with Celebrate Recovery. Also, my husband was in recovery, and it was such great healing for both of us. Yeah, and we went to it a couple of years. It's a wonderful program. I'm so happy you're part of that.
So there is a Celebrate Recovery. There's like 3 or more in town. I don't have all of them off the top of my head, but Friday night at Autumn Ridge Church from 6:30 to 8:30, there's childcare provided. Every Friday night we're there. On holidays, we'll be there. Everybody's welcome, not just from addiction, anxiety, shame, grief, family dysfunction, all of it. So. Any other questions?
I just feel like we have an addictive society. It doesn't need drugs or alcohol to be addictive, as you mentioned with gambling. And I don't think we have a very good understanding of what addiction really is. People are caught in these things, these choices and habits, and don't necessarily have thought, well, this is going to lead to addiction. Do you have any way of explaining that issue in terms of helping someone understand that there's a road to take that will help them with that desire to follow an addictive path?
So once a week at this one group I'm in, there's a YouTube video, and I'm gonna get you the link, and it's what is addiction, but it's what you were talking about with like the neural pathways and just the release of dopamine. But one thing I know, and I kind of touched on it a little bit, was for me, it was always chasing something, right? Even when it was an addiction with drugs, it was the rush and the dopamine that I got from being rebellious, from smoking, or from breaking the rules. And all of that starts at a young age. So if we don't fill that within us with healthy things and positive things that give us that dopamine and that rush, then that's how we end up in addiction to whatever it may be.
And I'll just say that growing up with what I was seeing in the household, I had a brother that went into a treatment program when he was 13 years old. Someone had overdosed on the main street of the town that we lived in, and it scared him. And he was the third person that we were aware of in the whole school district to go into a treatment program, because that was back in the early 80s. Probably, I'm gonna say like 80, 81. You just didn't talk about this stuff. You just kind of hid it. And for me, seeing all of my siblings, the thing I'm proud of growing up is, this is sad, I was the only kid never to be brought home in a squad car. You know, it's like, okay, all right, so I was the only one, all right. But my teachers, I had teachers that took me under their wing and, you know, got me involved in a political campaign or took me to Washington DC. And that is what got me through all of this, because otherwise I didn't want to drink, I didn't want to use drugs, and they were all around, you know, in a small little town outside of Rochester. But I think it's just having that, being shown that pathway of this is a way, and it takes the adults, and it's not just the parents. It could be the aunts, the uncles, the grandparents.
I'll expound on that.
Yeah.
So, a lot of times, like in my professional life, I'm not necessarily, I don't really speak about the faith aspect because whatever, right? So practical ways of supporting people with addiction would be, people need to have purpose and they need to be connected. So as a church or as a society, what can we do? We can include people and we can make them feel connected and part of, because when people struggling with addiction or mental health feel less than or not worthy of being at the table, then we fall into addiction and we fall into, you know, depression. And I feel like all of us can relate to that, at least that, feeling alone, feeling not wanted, feeling not included. So the solution to addiction in 2 words would be love and community. Meeting people where they're at, walking alongside them, not pushing, not trying to fix. When they're ready, walking alongside them in whatever ways when they're ready. It can't be when we want them to, or when system wants them to. It needs to be when they're ready, because otherwise.
30
it's
minutes.
a Band-Aid on it.
Is there any questions?
Hi, Carol.
Oh, we're seeing someone on phone.
She's asking a question.
Oh, is she? Hold on just a second.
Hold on, Carol.
Is that Carol?
Carol.
She- Kara. Okay, hold on. Right there. I can't, I have to ask her to unmute.
Carol, you have to
There you
unmute.
go. There you go.
There you
You're
go.
unmuted.
Hi. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to thank you so much for sharing your story. I get to work with Val on a regular basis. I work for Olmsted County under the Child Protection System in the Parent Support Outreach Program. It's a voluntary program where we primarily reach out to moms who have had prior terminations due to mental health, chemical issues, struggles that cause them not to parent their child or be able to or have their rights terminated. So I just wanted to say that just in regards to that last question, simply Val stated it pretty well and so did Tony, but I've heard opposite of addiction is connection. And Val was saying she was chasing like a dopamine rush. A dopamine rush could be laughing with your friends. It could mean winning a game in sports. So I do believe the opposite of addiction is connection. We all are human beings and we need to feel connected. And I think it's so important right now in our day and age because we can be so isolated with technology. And there's awesome things with technology. Like Val texted me just 20 minutes or 30 minutes ago saying she was going to be speaking and I was able to jump on because of Zoom. And so I'm so thankful for technology, but we do need to be aware, like, am I connecting with my neighbor? Am I connecting with that person across the street that I haven't seen come out of their house for quite a while? We all need connection. And then finally, I just want Tony to know how grateful I am for her daughter because I get to work with moms who've had similar experiences to Val, and Val can get in there and talk to them in a way that I have no clue how to talk to them. And I just am so thankful for her. And I'm so thankful for both of your stories. I believe this story needs to be shared over and over again with people that we work with, people at Olmsted County, people in churches. Like, this is an amazing testimony and amazing story that you both have together. And it's very powerful and impactful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'm just gonna say that today was a preview of the book that I've been working on for years. And it's called, I even have a title, Our Paths Have Crossed Before. So, you got a preview. Got it. Yes, John.
Hi, Tony. And you know, and lots of folks around here know. I walked the path of, I was a drunk for 10 to 12 years. I want to applaud you for what you're doing. For me, the most important thing about these conversations is giving people hope. And you don't know who's sitting here might be the person that needs to hear that message. So keep talking. Tell people, you know, I am. Thanks.
Thank you. Sure.
Yeah.
To that point, your best audiences would be junior high and senior high kids. Seriously, I mean, if you or somebody could give the same story to those kids, there's gonna be an element of those kids in there that can identify that and can hear and whatever it is, whatever seed you drop, would just be incredible. Because that's where a lot of this starts. Valerie talked about being very, very young. So the younger we can talk to these kids about those situations, because we know a lot of those kids are coming from families like you grew up in, so, and they have nobody, they can't tell their friends, or they don't want their friends to know, they don't want anybody to know. So if they can hear the message.
Yeah. Which is a perfect lead-in for, there will be an event in the beginning of April, and I'm sure you'll hear more about it, where we are going to be talking about addictions and overdoses. There will be Narcan training. There will be a panel discussion of people that have struggled with addiction, people that have survived overdoses, which my daughter was one. And then we'll have Narcan training at the beginning, panel discussion, resources, along with Narcan training at the end. And that will be, I think we're shooting for April 6th.
Where is that gonna be?
We are trying to get a site to be determined, but we will make sure people know about it. And then on June 3rd, I'm working with St. Luke's Episcopal Church, where we are going to do another community event on addictions, overdoses, and suicides. And for Valerie and I don't think that we have enough fingers and toes to count the number of people that we have lost to addiction, suicides, all of that through the years. So there will be a time of remembrance, and that's on June 3rd, along with parents that are going to share their son died of an overdose, someone that has survived multiple overdoses, really just to get the word out on, we've got to be talking about this, especially with all the fentanyl going around. It's terrifying for us because not only is Valerie's father really struggling with the heroin addiction, my son also. So that's where, you know, we can do better, and we're going to.
What was your name?
Jerry Riley. Jerry?
Jerry?
Yeah.
All right, so you solidified the deal for me. Because I've been hearing that and feeling like I need to get in schools, and I was actually asked to. So in the next 30 days, I'm making a pledge. I'm gonna contact the school for the younger youth, and I will go speak. to them.
Awesome. That'd be wonderful.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just so everybody knows, because this is archived on our church YouTube, you can pass that link on to other people and share this story that way also. So I think that's important. If you know someone who needs to hear this story, or even if they don't need to, but for good information, please pass that on to them.
Yeah. So mom and daughter best friends now. There's hope, you know, my saying is there's always hope as long as you're still breathing. And I truly believe that. There's always hope.
So, my attitude and my feelings about my mother as a teenager, it really shifted once I had my first child. I'm like, Mom, what do? The baby's crying, please help me. And that was actually the healing, is when I had my first child. And I got pregnant when I was 17, so I was 18 years old. And since then, I mean, now I talk to my mom like 5 times a day. I gotta fill out a form. I gotta send an email. What do I do? How do I say things? And before, like, we went a period of 3-4 years of nothing. And I thought that my mom would never talk to me anymore. And I'll just share this one story. It was about 3 years of us not speaking. The last time I went to her house was when I knocked on the window, like she was telling me, or telling you guys about. And I'm sitting in Moore County Jail, and I hadn't spoken to my mom. And the guard came up, and the guard was like, Valerie, you have a package. There was 2 paper bags full of commissary items, food, shampoo, deodorant, pens, pencils, markers, everything that you could buy off Canteen. And in that moment, 'cause I had almost lost my life a month before, I was like, nobody cares that I'm here. Nobody loves me. Everybody that even knows I'm here, they're all on drugs and they don't really care about me anyways. I was like, that can't be for me. And I said, who is that from? And the guard was like, it's from Tony Mangskau. And I literally fell to the ground and was like, my mom still loves me. In that moment, I knew my mom still loves me. She had to do what she had to do. But the minute that I got into a safe place, and then after that, she was walking me alongside the whole process. She was just waiting for me to come home in a responsible way where I was ready to get home.
But thank you so much for coming and listening, and again, just let us know if we can help with anything. Thank you.